Subverting generative AI by playing surrealist games. This is going to be timely reflection on how can we meaningfully respond to the challenge posed by generative AI from a critical, artistic, and designer perspective. First of all, let me share what is the challenge posed by it. Well, so many people are using generative AI and publishing their social media posts, but there are even robots producing fake websites with fake images, and there are very few people actually overseeing this activity to the point of flooding Google search results. If you search, for example, for baby peacock on Google image search, you may not find an image of a real peacock. And by now, if we look at them, we can more or less tell the difference, but wait a few months and we will not be able to tell the difference between an image of an actual photograph taken of a baby peacock and a generative AI image of that possible peacock, but maybe something else will come out that is not at all a peacock, and we may get used to the image, the image of a baby peacock to be actually cuter than it is in real life, and at some point we might really take that image as reality. Well, that is something that's not new at all. It's not an innovation. Has been denounced by Jean Baudrillard, a French philosopher who analyzed in the 70s and 80s the cognitive aspects of capitalism and this social production of reality that we are in, this regime of production of reality where the referents or the objects that these images are referring are no longer to be found, meaning that the signs, they become simulacra or a hyperreality, where the imaginary becomes indistinguishable from the real. And of course, I have to emphasize this because not many people nowadays with such acceptance of postmodernism and these ideas that, well, the imaginary may be even more real than the real. No, no, no. Unfortunately, the imaginary most of the time is less real than the real, because that's exactly what the function of imagination is to go into a virtual reality, something that's not yet real. Don't get it wrong. Virtual reality is not real yet, but maybe in the future it will be. So there is a point in imagining. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that if we cannot distinguish between those, we are in a very dangerous regime. And that's exactly what John Baudrillard's message was. It has been reflected critically by many people since its publication. However, there are very few artistic and designer responses to that try really to recover back this thing. Well, I would like to pitch here a surrealist response to this situation of hyperrealism. And before I jump into that, my proposal, I have to go back to history and recover a bit of few things, because a lot of people are forgetting that surrealism was already anticipating what artificial intelligence was capable of more than 100 years ago. And surrealism did not just question the quality of the representation, whether the image was close to reality or not, to what extent it was distant. But most importantly, surrealism was questioning who got access or privilege to represent reality, to tell what was going on in the world. For example, they engaged deeply in with the post-World War One aftermath. I mean, this moment when people are figuring out what they have done, the amount of damage, and not just physical, environmental damage, but also psychological damage, and the role of media and propaganda in keeping people away from understanding what was going on in that reality. So they devised many different artworks and approaches to address those contradictions brought forward by this control over information and understanding and the information about ourselves, most importantly. And one of that became very popular even to these days are the surrealist games. And they made, through these games, the unconscious more conscious. People would play these games to access their unconscious and express something that was being covered, that was being blocked, concealed in that psychological dimension. So these games, they were simple and ready to be played by anyone, even people who were not trained as artists, even people who didn't have an access to that specific kind of art. For example, a painter could actually write poetry by playing a surrealist game on poetry making. One of the most famous surrealist game is called automated drawing on and automated writing. Here you see the muse of automated writing, Helene Smith. She was elected by the Surrealists because she was wild in these experiments. For example, for writing by following the flow of consciousness, non-stop, without a filter, just letting it flow, right? And at some point, she was channeling Martians. She claimed to be telling stories from Mars. And then she even devised and developed this alphabet that came from Mars and nobody could read on. And only she could actually help interpret the messages coming from the aliens. And that's why she was like elected as the muse of automated writing and drawing. And think about it, how similar this is to current generative AI, right? We just need to draw simple analogies. What surrealists call unconsciousness roughly corresponds to today's artificial intelligence latent space. What are those? Here I'm gonna borrow a few visualizations made by Echevarria, and he was trying to explain how this latent spaces and interpolation works. He was using this simple example of Lego figures heads as an object that has multiple variations so that people could understand what a latent space is. But this is definitely a simplification because latent spaces are so much bigger than what we can convey through a 2D imagery, right? But most importantly, the function of it is to help cluster data by automatically recognizing patterns. So it's latent because that space can be overlapped and crisscrossed. So you can see in this space how one thing relates to another one. That's why it's called latent. Here you see three clusters that Echevarria just did as an example of what kind of advantage you got if you put this information in the same kind of space. So you can start to see, for example, through automated recognition patterns, that clusters emerge by some common visual features of these images. Well, it doesn't need to be necessarily images, right? Latent spaces can relate textual data too. We're just using images here because it's so much quicker to understand what a pattern is. If you look at the images at the cluster on the left side, you will see that they share some kind of banded appearance. Like they have like a lot of unshaved hair. Some of them have an anger expression in their face. So these are the bandits cluster. And who calls that bandit, right? Who identifies this and gives some meaning is the people behind it. The machine is just saying there's some kind of visual resemblance. However, that visual resemblance is also used by humans to attach meaning to other people. For example, they might carry on some kind of visual patterns they have found out to new interaction with new people, and they might judge people by their faces, which is currently considered to be unethical. But in the past and around the 19th century, There was even a science of physiognomy uh, and other sciences and approaches to identify whether someone was a criminal just by look at their face, and people were really brought to jail just because they look like a criminal. Of course, this science has been debunked because it didn't yield to good results. A lot of honest people were in prison, and in that became something, unfortunately, still a practice that goes away and then goes back. For example, automated image recognition that also relies on this kind of latent spaces still perform this kind of prejudgment. And so these clusters that are formed by latent spaces, unfortunately, they are they are laden by human meaning, and the kind of prejudice that we develop in our world carry over to these spaces, especially if we don't explicitly try to mend those biases. One important thing to understand is that these latent spaces, they relate information in a way that can be um, speculated if there's no direct connection. For example, you see here on the left side an image of two Lego faces. They are unrelated yet. However, they carry some basic fundamental syntactic relationships. They seem to be coming, for example, for the same kind of person, and it's just varying the expression. So this dots, this blue dots that separates those two images, is a possibility for the machine to generate new images that are gradually showing the transformation from one facial expression to another. That's called interpolation, and that's one of the most important aspects of generative AI, particularly to images, that it can interpolate data and generate new data if that data points are related by some kind of parameter. Here, it's not explicit what the parameter is, but as you can see, those two images, they are about the same distance from each other. And but on the left side on top, you see it's 3 points on the Y scale and -2 on the X scale. That could be, for example, that this person is relaxed and happy, and on the right side, rightmost side of the image, you see a face that is -2 on the Y scale and 3 on the X scale, which might mean someone who is relaxed but someone who is unhappy. Well, I don't know exactly what those parameters mean, but what I mean is that if you have a latent space, you can interpolate and generate new data that is already connected by filling in the gaps and borrowing some visual elements from those two images. However, sometimes, actually most of the times, when you ask for interpolations, generative AI will hallucinate, meaning that it will distort the data and generate images that are considered to be bad, wrong, mistaken, weird, uncanny, not recognizable. I'm just making a simple example here. I just got the first image, the last two images that we saw on the previous slide, and I asked them to be blended by Midjourney, one of the most important generative AIs of our current times. And Midjourney generated this weird combination that definitely has no explanatory meaning to understand more how does latent spaces work. However, there are some kind of elements in this image, like some new faces that they are very uncanny. They look like a ghost. Look at the ghost on the left side. There's definitely some hallucination going on here, because if I go back to the past image, you cannot see anything like a ghost, right? There's nothing like a ghost here, and we didn't ask Midjourney to devise anything like a ghost. But it did, because it is trying to connect the different images out there the different parts of the images and try to find what is common amongst them and speculate something that will be in between one image and the other image. And this is done by drawing on some vast amounts of data, interrelated data. So Midjourney is not just drawing from those two images and blending them pixel by pixel. Midjourney is trying to interpret somehow and relate those images that I fed to the system with these thousands and millions of images that they have in their trained data. And that's how it becomes a bit uncanny. Otherwise, if I would just mix pixel by pixel, we would have more like an overlap image and not really an interpolated image. And looking back to the surrealist movements, well, hallucinations, they are strangely familiar to surrealist imagery. Look at what happens here in this Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory, probably one of the most known surrealist paintings. You see clocks melting as if they were, I don't know, some piece of meat and or some piece of metal that has been heated. And he's trying to create this uncanny situation on purpose so that people understand that time is that thing that flows and that we cannot really get a hold of. Although we build clocks, these clocks are part of us as a kind of organic matter, and clocks are consumed by ants, as in the left bottom side of the image conveys. Well, there are many things that we can speculate about how we unconsciously perceive time here. I'm not going to go into that. I really want to address that what Salvador Dali was doing here resembles visually on a superficial level to what AI does. So combining properties of one object with properties of another object, metadata, and then using that to generate a new kind of image that is uncanny precisely because clocks, they are typically built by sturdy material that does not melt like this, right? Anyway, so here's the thing that's happening nowadays with the generative AI movement or hype. OpenAI, one of the most important companies pushing forth this technology, paid homage to and appropriated Salvador Dali's name, artwork, and creative process. So their flagship generative AI for image making is called dall-e, and that's a combination between the famous robot figure Wall-E and Salvador Dali's surname. Unfortunately, OpenAI is not so aware, maybe, of the work of Salvador Dali and what does he stands for. Because if we read papers written by computer scientists that work at OpenAI and have discussed and presented the algorithms behind dall-e and stable diffusion, the algorithm that they use are the diffusion models. You will see that they make some weird experiments using that same generative AI that looks not very, let's say, respectful to the artist. So here's what they generated using what they call dall-e. Vibrant portrait painting of Salvador Dali with a robotic half face. And the AI generated those images that are pretty horrible, and they don't pay enough respect to the faces of the artist. Salvador Dali really liked to be in pictures, but he was always playing a mysterious face. If you look at the pictures here, most of them are not like mysterious, and they look like either this person is mentally afflicted or is a dumb person. All right, it's not really preparing or posing for the picture, which is something that Salvador Dali absolutely liked doing. Well, how could they control for this? I'm not saying that the algorithm should control this. Though. I'm just saying that they are appropriating everything that this artists have done just for the sake of his own popularity and not really paying respect to what he stands for. So the question that many people are nowadays discussing is that did dall-e enable everyone who has access to it and who can pay for it, and it's sometimes not cheap, do they become an artist just because they can start generating any kind of image, even with a Salvador Dali style? Of course not, man. dall-e turned artists into anonymous cyborg zombie slaves, imprisoned in this nightmarish black box that generative AI is. They remain there as half machine, half people, living dead, generating art on demand at no compensation or even credit. And that's only possible because dall-e and other generative AI systems, they are scrapping the web for millions of artists who have in the past shared their work for free in websites such as Deviant Art, where you can actually um, say, hey, look world, what I've got, and you can follow my work and we can have a conversation. You may even hire me for my art. Unfortunately, these artists could never imagine that one day a generative AI system would suck their artwork and generate something else without giving any credit, even incurring in some copyright infringements. Even if the artist have used a Creative Commons license, that requires to attribute credit to the person, which is not given currently by generative AI. And that's also so unlike Salvador Dali himself, because he was really using his name as a brand, even to offer for product merchandise, from television programs. He was really a popular figure who profited from his name as a commercial artist. He was definitely the most financially successful artist of the surrealist movement. Here he's posing a picture in his house in Portugal, Spain. So I don't think Salvador Dali would like what's going on with dall-e, not giving credit to anyone, not letting artists become rich persons because he believed that artists deserve. Why not? Why can't everybody become rich in capitalism and not artists? Why should artists become stay as poor? What is the point of this? And I think he had a point, right? So dall-e, although it has its name, cannot be considered to be a surrealist machine. Instead, it's better be conceived as a hyperrealist machine. And now I'm, of course, making a drawing from Jean Baudrillard's understanding of hyperrealism. So hyperrealism means producing images with no traceable origins. We don't know where they come from, and therefore they are less real than the real. There's no double on these images. There's no object or reference that we can pinpoint, because those algorithms, those generative AI currently, they don't show where these images are coming from, because they are drawing from this trained data set. And we know that, but these are millions of images there, and we cannot know exactly which images were tapped in each generated image. All right, so we cannot, they currently cannot show credit. I don't know if that will be possible one day, but currently the situation is that they are hyper-realistic machines that generate images that cannot be traced back. And my research question as a designer of this kind of technologies, can surrealism save us from hyper-realism? Well, let's go back to the basic premise of surrealism. It aims at uncovering the reality that nobody wants to face. The so-called surreal, the real that's more real than the real. So in surrealism, we are not flighting away from reality. We are not looking for something that is completely imaginatory. We are definitely looking at imagination as a means to get more real than the real. So we can, when we see a surrealist image, we have this sense that there is something at stake here. Then if we keep looking at that, we might understand better our reality. The artist who better synthesized all of this in a very clear discourse is René Magritte. And he definitely anticipated many of Jean Baudrillard's discussion in the 80s and 70s and 80s. So René Magritte has a lot of interesting artwork. My favorite one is this. This is not a pipe. Ceci in a pipe, that has multiple layers of interpretation, but the most simple one is that what is written in the label is denying, negating what is painted in the image part of the same painting. This is not, this is not a pipe, is not the title of this artwork. The title of this artwork is The Treachery of Images. And by providing this title, René Magritte made this artwork quite accessible. Without that, it would be harder to understand what he wanted really to bring forth to the public sphere. And in here, his intentions are more clear. He wants to discuss that images, they can mischieve us. They can make us feel like we are looking at reality, but instead we are just looking at the image. However, what if the image is all that, the image is all of what we've got? What if we can only see images? And everything that we say that is not a pipe, well, it's an image of a pipe, right? But it's also not a pipe because the image of a pipe is not a pipe. And even the words, this is not a pipe, is also not a pipe. But a pipe might not be a pipe really, because the word pipe, the concept of pipe, is not the same as the matter, physical matter that constitutes what a pipe is. And we wouldn't even have the concept of a pipe without the concept of a pipe. If the matter was there in this shape, and we would not know what a pipe is. For example, if we would come from another culture where people don't use these pipes, and this is probably something that happens a lot. People see this picture and they don't know what it is, especially in the new generations that are now currently using digital pipes that are called vapes. They look at this, they might not even know that some steam may come out of it. All right, so this is happening in front of us. That René Magritte's work is still pretty relevant. We rely so much on signs and symbols for the production of reality that sometimes we come up in a contradiction that we don't know what is and what is not. For everything, not just for the pipes. So that's definitely a contradiction. I tried to engage with this artwork, my first experiments with Midjourney. So I generated the exact phrase, right? Ceci ne parle ne pipe by René Magritte. And I was wondering what will come out of this system? Will it try to reproduce exactly the same artwork, or will it change? And as you can see, it definitely looks like the original artwork in some sense structurally, because there is a pipe, but the pipe now, instead of being in an abstract space, it is in a more symbolic space. There are a tree and some clouds on the back, which resembles the painting style of René Magritte expressing in other artworks. So it's drawing from Magritte's works and generating language, a visual language that definitely resembles his works. And the generative AI also adds up this weird green or grass growing out of the pipe's extremity. And it looks very nightmarish, because what is the association between grass and pipes? But looking at the other artworks by René Magritte, those kind of associations were quite common. So yes, it looks interesting to look. And if I wouldn't tell that I use generative AI, if I would say this was an actual René Magritte's work, many people might be deceived, and they would agree, yes, yeah, it looks nightmarish, outlandish, and mesmerizing as any other, again, René Magritte's work. Well, but that was too easy, right? To come up with this would not enable us to generate a more deeper discourse, because in this way I just made an evidence that what Hideo Magritte was talking about is still in place, and generative AI cannot really, doesn't go anything further than producing images that are undistinguishable from that reality, hyperreal images. But I kept playing and fussing around, and I got much more grip using ChatGPT and plus dall-e 3, because you could talk to the machine before you actually tell the prompt, and then the prompt, it can be more richly controlled. I mean, what you what I get from ChatGPT plus dall-e is a better control of the kind of network semantic associations that I would tap with my prompt, and then the image might be more close to what I expect than if I just do trial and error in using Midjourney. Midjourney definitely generates nicer looking pictures, even to a higher resolution, but Midjourney requires you to be using trial and error approach, whereas ChatGPT plus dall-e 3 enables you to have a more dialogical, and you can ask for something that relates to the previous creation. So you have an iterative approach. You can tell more of this, more of that, or less of this, less of that. That's not possible with Midjourney. Midjourney always react to prompts individually in their own. You cannot relate prompts and improve your prompts using Midjourney unless you're just writing yourself. So using this technology, I asked ChatGPT to provide me a critical self-portrait. What if dall-e was looking at itself and reflecting what it is and what it entails? This picture you see here is not the initial one. It's the final refined version after my dialogue and trying to ask, is that really you? Are you're covering something from me. You're hiding something. Please show me your true self. And that's what I've got. So indeed, dall-e, after I ask many times, and I say, hey, you forgot about your environmental impact. Hey, you forgot about that appropriation of artists all around the world. And you forgot that most of the artists who share their work for free online, they are non-white people seeking job opportunities because they live in a precarious world that does not pay equally to people, that does not offer opportunities in the same way for non-white people. And by the way, you serve mostly white people, right? Yes. And then why don't you go ahead and paint yourself as a white person instead of use this black face that you showed me in the past, right? So yeah, that was important. And that's how I came up with this image. It's very uncanny and annoying to look, and that's what I wanted to make people think about the environmental and social impact of using generative AI like dall-e. But I was using dall-e itself to do that, which means there's definitely a contradiction of using that against itself. And I brought this forward to discuss with my peers in my field in Design Research Society conference in Boston last June, together with Mariana Fonseca Braga and David Perez. We organized this conversation called Social Design at the Brink. And in one of the moments in this conversation, we showed this picture and we asked our peers to critically discuss what was being depicted there. What was the contradiction behind this image? We didn't tell anything. There were no labels. What you see here, the sticky notes have been added by the readers, people who are reading this image and discussing it. And we wrote a paper reporting on that. But the important thing is that we were drawing from a method called culture circle, which is curious enough devised by Paulo Freire in 1960s using the term generative image. Of course, it didn't have exactly artificial intelligence in mind when he used this term. Well, what he meant was that if you would show an image and have a dialogue and discussion about it, that image would generate some themes for discussing. And that's why they were called generative images. But not any image would work. They had to be designed and created in a way to convey a contradiction that were actual in the lives of the people that are supposed to discuss that image. So we had to do some studies, and we discussed in depth what were the main contradictions being discussed by social designers at that time, and that's why we brought generative AI as part of, and especially the social and environmental impact of that as an example of a disruptive technologies of our times that everybody wanted to discuss. And that's the background research behind this activity, and it generated, as expected, very good debate. It is synthesized in our report published recently by DRS. So my take on this, and also what the surrealists did, instead of denying instrumental rationality as the Dadaist past artist movements that the surrealists engaged with, but they also surpassed, surrealists, they pitted rationality against itself instead of denying it. So look at the example here. A Dadaist collage on the left side by Hannah Hoch, and a surrealist collage on the right side by Max Ernst. Just by looking superficially at the composition, you can see in the left side there is very little regularity. On the right side, you can clearly see some kind of a grid, some kind of order emerging, although both images are busy and there's a kind of chaos. But the surrealists, they try to use the merging rationality against itself as a source of criticism, whereas the Dadaists, they would say rationality turns into irrationality and generates the worldwide war. And they really wanted people to be more critical about technology in itself, and that's why you see a lot of technology being put on top of people's heads as if they were crushing people. And Dadaism was a kind of escape of this madness of being completely directed by machines, and then it tried to recover some spontaneity in its expression that has been lost by this rationality society, this industrial society, heavily industrial society that produces weapons of mass destruction that turns back against humans. That was the Dadaist basic claim behind his works. And the right side, you see something completely different by Max Ernst. He was exploring in this picture what kind of unconscious desires are somehow forgotten or postponed by rationality, but that comes back to ask its own fulfillment at some point. And that's why there's these two poles of rationality being a means, being something that conceal our desires, rationality being something that prevent us from realizing, but rationality also being as a means to realize that, to fulfill that desire in the future if we turn its direction. Inspired then by surrealists, I like to understand how artificial intelligence, particularly generative AI, works and use it against its biases. And I've tried this before, and now I'm realizing this is pretty much an interesting approach for it. Design and play surrealist games is an excellent way of achieving both. For many years now, I have been using surrealist games with my design students to learn creativity, and particularly collective creativity. So they play Exquisite Corpse, the most famous generative creativity surrealist games, but less non-popular ones like Entopic Graphomania, where you try to find a text behind a text, Automatic Drawing, and many others. The Book of Surrealist Games by Alastair Broche and Mel Gooding has been a very important reference for me. They compile many games into one book, but I also draw on games that I find on the internet, and has been so far a very interesting source of new ideas for moving away from the traditional brainstorming method that is so commonplace in design creativity. Surrealist games and generative AI, that's something I realized most recently, it has common mechanisms. It taps on the collective unconsciousness, it explores a vast space of possibilities, combines elements in unusual ways because it's sizing the chance of something unexpected happening. Chance is important, but it's not total chance because it's bounded to the collective unconsciousness. So it's trying to make things that everyone is unaware of, make them meet and appear and show up in the artwork. And now, here's my recent research question that I've got a few weeks ago. Can a new surrealist games help develop critical consciousness on artificial intelligence? Yes, since I was studying generative AI algorithms, while I was remembering my surrealist game experience, I came up with an idea. I designed a game called Pixelated Dreams for my Master of Fine Arts MXD, Master in Design students at the University of Florida, so they could understand the stable diffusion algorithm behind dall-e. So these students, they would play a surrealist game that I designed to understand this very complex algorithm that not even many computer scientists can understand. I don't have a doubt that my students will not be able to read the papers by Rombach et al. And Ali and other authors who wrote about how this generative AI works. And I had to do something about it because my students were interested, well, if not already using generative AI for their own works, and especially for their students because they are teaching assistants and some of our undergrads are already trying out these kind of tools. Does it mean for graphic design education, for example? We had to discuss it and we did it now. So here's how I approached this game. Instead of creating something out of blue, out of scratch, I typically create surrealist games and other kinds of games by appropriating some exciting toy or exciting games. So I mix and match different parts of games and create new ones. So in this case, I repurposed Pixel Bits, which is a water fuse beads toy. Yeah, there are quite some fuse beads toy that are different from this one. You can use iron to fuse the beads, so kids they will draw images with some beads, and then they would later on use iron to fuse the beads, and the image would stand on its own as a physical object. And in this case, pixel beads requires only water, and after water is sprayed on it, you just let it dry. Then the object becomes quite sturdy, and you can use stickers on that. I didn't use any stickers because I really wanted to focus on the pixels as an analogy to the pixels that are generated by stable diffusion algorithm. Well, I have to say that this is an ongoing research project, much longer than this. I've been doing embodied algorithm simulations, and because I really want many different kind of people that are not into computer science who would have no chance of understanding these algorithms by reading a paper or even reading the source code. I really want more people publicly to scrutinize these algorithms to understand their human-to-human interactions, because most people, they believe what happens in a computer happens only inside a computer and has no social consequence whatsoever, not to speak of environmental consequence, which is something that I'm increasingly becoming aware precisely because of generative AI due to its incredible environmental damage. But coming back to my past experience, I tried using embodied algorithms to convey what pairwise, deliberate, and Git and even Facebook EdgeRank impact would be on political deliberations. These 4 projects were done together with Brazilian Ministry of House Ministry. They are interested on developing and evaluating current social participation tools. And oh yeah, we asked, for example, a question like, what if the Brazilian constitution was put in a GitHub, and then people would use pull requests to make constitution amendments, and that question would only make sense if the public would be able to understand what Git is and how it works and how it's different from the current legislation process. But beyond that, I also did birdoids, boids simulation with my design students so they could understand how to design for emerging performances and think about complexity in interaction design. And my latest attempt was to embody the Hungarian algorithms of distributing tasks among different workers. In this case, you see an image of a person playing an AI that is delegating some design work to a Loompa designer who's a precarious design worker in this not so distant future where designers are treated as delivery workers and they have to design a logo for only $5, for example. So we really wanted to show with all of these examples what is the human-to-human interactions implied by computer algorithms. Coming back to well, so when people understand computer algorithms, they can interact more critically with the computer. They become more aware. This is so noticeable amongst the YouTubers who figure out how does YouTube algorithm works, and they start to change their agenda, the way how they produce it works, and even make comments about the algorithm, critical comments in their YouTube channels. But this can be true in any other platform if people become more aware. So I really wanted my design students to become more aware, critically aware of how generative AI algorithm works, particularly the stable diffusion algorithm. But before we start actually generating images, if it's a surrealist game, Pixelated Dreams, we have to start by closing our eyes and remembering a recent dream. If they didn't remember any dream, they could rely on the last dream that someone shared with them. Here is how they started the game by training the machine with images that convey those recent dreams. It's hard challenge in terms of visual representation because you only have a few pixels left to represent something which is typically quite difficult. Even if I ask them to represent the dream using just pen and paper, they would have the trouble, and using pixels is more harder. And after they did, they write a one-word label. And that difficulty is also part of the challenging aspect of any game, right? So everyone, the players, they created their own images and they spray water for the beads to fuse and stick together. They had to wait a few minutes, not too many minutes, otherwise if the image is overly fixed, it won't it won't be possible to take it apart, which is an important aspect of the denoising part of this process. And while after the images they were generated by players, a few selected players called prompt engineers, they would combine the labels available and they may add even new words, connecting words. These are written to pinky stick notes, whereas the original words from the images, they are in the blue sticky notes. So they would compile those labels and words and they would generate a new dream, a more complex dream. They did not need to use all of them, and after they have devised their dream, the requested images were thrown inside a jar. And some of these images were a bit damaged, they lost parts, they were broken, but that's not a problem because what comes next is adding random pixels. That's called the process of adding noise to images, or noising, and shaking completes the process. It's called forward diffusion or noising. And they were like, oh my gosh, all the images are going to be destroyed, completely destroyed. It will be completely random. No, what comes out of this jar is partially random, partially associated by semantics, roughly speaking. Of course, in the images here, it's hard to retrieve what were the original word association. But think about that. Originally, each image represented a concept that was written down by a label. And those relationships are a little bit represented by the thickness of the beads. The pixels are a bit together. Some of them are torn out, but they are sticking together because there's some semantic association between them. So if you retrieve one pixel and that pixel is typically associated with another pixel, then you should retrieve the whole thing. And that's the basic premise behind this diffusion models. If the pixels on the images, they have somehow kind of a meaning that relates to the context that when they are used together. So, for example, if there is a request to generate an image of a heart, all the pixels that will be retrieved, they will probably have warm colors because most colors to use to represent hearts are warm. And maybe if you ask for a heart, it will speculate hearts typically come closer to uh, human body context, and then it will generate the whole body around the heart, or any other context that depending on the kind of word association. That's why prompt engineer is so important, because you are actually tapping to the semantic associations and not ordering the specific pixels, but really the networks that will generate pixels in the next step, which is denoising. So players, they got into different groups. Now they are not playing as humans any longer. They are playing the roles of computers as GPU, graphic processing units. And there were, in this case, 2 GPUs, each one of them by 4 players. And they had to respond to that prompt and generate an image that would convey the new dream. And here you see an example of one group generating all the steps, or the most important steps in the generation process. As you can see, many hands are reaching out to those pixels and removing the noise, because at the beginning there is just a mass. The whole mass is not really shown in this picture because some of the pixels they are drawing from is on other parts of the table, but you saw the mass in the last picture here, right? So this is the mass that the massiness that they are denoising. Okay, they are taking the noise out and they are separating the pieces. And while they do that, they keep apart those stuck pieces. However, they may change their meaning and the purposes while they assemble that new image. And after they assemble the new image, they spray with water so that image becomes fixed and ready to be presented for the prompt engineer and whoever is interested in seeing that. So as you can see here, there is a kind of a collective creativity process going on, which is rather similar what generative AI is doing. The artists, they are working inside, but remember, they are working as zombies, slaves, and anonymous artists, right? That's what these students are doing at this moment. And I was telling all the time then, don't speak up, you're just a computer now, you cannot talk. And they were laughing at me, but and I was being rude with them, because that's what this generative AI is doing to artists. Although there are no real artists there, but that's what's going on. Multiple artists are actually contributing to generate that image, because if there was not for the training, there will be nothing. AI wouldn't be able to do it, because AI is not intelligent at all. The intelligence that AI embodies is the intelligence of the artists who trained it. All right. So it's just making that collective intelligence or collective consciousness available for the prompt engineer. And indeed, the prompt engineer could also tap directly to that collective consciousness without going through the AI, because we wanted to compare what is the prompt engineer or a human without using AI would generate using the same prompt, and compare that with the GPUs. And that was also the competitive aspect of this game. And here you can see the image generated by the human prompt engineers. It doesn't look like responding well for the prompt. It's very wild. There's so many things. You cannot even distinguish what is this image about, because they were working with no constraints. They didn't draw from those images that came out of the jar that were already stuck to each other, so they could freely create their new image. So they didn't have to deal with the semantic association objectively implemented into the system. They could rely freely on the on-demand creativity, on whatever they would come up in their minds at that moment. And after the AIs have worked, the GPU-1 and GPU-2, they generate their artwork, and the prompt designer or prompt engineer, then they voted which one of those images better convey the prompt on top. The alien feel tiredness fatigue when roller coastering in Tehran goes to a cruise to Ghana. That is the crazy prompt that engineers devised. And yeah, unexpectedly, their own response to that work wasn't very much favored, not even to themselves. They didn't like it. They prefer GPU-1 and GPU-2. And then we didn't end the experiment here because there's something that current generative AI cannot do, but I expect this to be possible in the future, maybe if we keep pressing those companies to become more accountable. It is called explainable AI. This is a new critical paradigm that demands that generative AI offer resources for you to question. How do you come up with this answer, with this image, with this action? And if AI is not unable to respond to that, then you can feel like you are in an unsafe situation because you're using technology that you don't know how it works. Whereas if you are having a good explanation, and the explanation is sound, and it is something that you can rely for future interactions, like you can inform you better your interactions in the future, then you have a more fair in artificial intelligence, or more just or more scrutinizable. All right. This is not yet available, but we could actually simulate in our game. After the first round of votes, we asked them, all right, now you explain your artwork. And after each group of players explain it, we cast votes again. And then we see if the explanation has an impact on the aesthetic perception of these images. And indeed it is. Not such a big difference, but the prompt designer got an extra vote. The GPU-2 lost one vote. But they still won the game because the image, they had a more minimalistic and more efficient way of representing that has a more impact on the viewer. That's how I interpret why this image won the competition. But in any case, it's worth noting that people preferred GPU generated that rely much more on randomness and less control than the prompt engineer side of it. And after we played this Pixelate Dreams game, we had an opportunity to critically read Midjourney, which is one of the most interesting generative AI images nowadays used by graphic designers. So we actually typed the prompt, that same crazy prompt that we saw before: alien feel tiredness fatigue when roller coasting in Tehran goes to a cruise to Ghana. This is the image on the top corner, the right top corner. You see one of the images generated by Midjourney, and it's outlandish. And students, what the hell is that? That's not. There were some Iranian students in this cohort, and also Ghanaian students. They said that's not Tehran, that's not Ghana. But then AI generated this combination, which is the interpolation between those two very different countries. That's why they don't look like in either Ghana or Tehran. It's a combination of both. There are some elements of it. For example, the roller coaster seems to be underdeveloped as much as Ghana is conceived to be in the database that Midjourney is drawing from. So if you ask for a picture of Ghana, and the students, they ask me next, can you please ask for a picture of Ghana? Then you see a picture of underdeveloped a side of the country. It doesn't show, for example, Accra and the big business going on there. It only shows the prejudice that people in the global north has against places in Africa, as if everything in Africa was underdeveloped and basically something primitive in the eyes of the former colonizers. So this student was aware now of this generative AI bias against his own nationality. As much as the other students who were also asking for other places, we went through all the nationality places by scrutinizing. What is the idea that Midjourney, how does Midjourney see Tehran? Is this overly stereotypical? And we went through all the um, international origins of these students, and we had a discussion very, very rich. So now students, they are aware that if they would use Midjourney, they would have to come to terms, understand its inherent bias, and be aware that they cannot just use those images without checking out with uh, people that they were representing. So basically, they recognize the images that we generated through Pixelated Dreams and even Midjourney as alien, mysterious, disjointed. Some generated images lean more towards absurdity, such as producing non-existent places or entities. We saw this in both Pixelated Dreams and Midjourney. And in their own reflections, they frequently referenced artificial intelligence tendency to hallucinate, fabricate information, and lie. When they said, "Oh, AI was lying to us about what Ghana is or what Tehran is," but then players start to ask themselves, can AI really lie if it doesn't know what truth is? Because when the process of training AI is not a process of giving truth to AI, and what is truth then? Is it just uh, showing a real image of a real world? What if we live in a world that is already an image in a hyperreal reality? How can we tell what is true and what is not? So that was definitely a difficult conversation that had no closing. At least what I'm happy with is experiments that the students, they are understanding it's their overall bias of this artificial intelligence, that it is to automate creative work, design work, for example, and it turns it obsolete, or at least more prone to precarization. But if we use generative AI to design new forms of collective intelligence, that will be a subversion of its inherent bias. So we are using, as surrealist taught us, using irrationality against itself. If we want to have truly surrealist machines in the future, because dall-e is not surrealist at all, it is hyperrealist machine. If we want surrealist machines, we must include visible as much as invisible artists. When I say visible artists, then we need to give credit. We need to have people show up. So maybe explainable AI is the way to go. So you generate the image, and then you can ask, which artist are you drawing from to generate that image? Whose works have you stolen or have you copied, and give attribution fairly using Creative Commons? But as well, we should keep this invisibility aspect that generative AI is already there, because that's where the ghosts are. That's where the aliens are, the Martians are. And this aspect of having collective consciousness to speak through the work must not be completely erased from the process. So generative AI is halfway to that, because if you generate an image using current generative AI, you definitely get something that is a kind of a gist of the collective consciousness. But since it's not controlled and you don't know how to change the parameters, you cannot make the collective consciousness less racist, for example, less biased against Ghana or other countries that are considered to be underdeveloped. So we definitely need the mix of between visible and invisible, and thus the threshold of visibility has to be publicly scrutinized and maybe co-designed in a participatory design way with designers, with artists, with public society, whoever would like to train and retrain and untrain those databases. These are the references for this. You can check that on my website for the full references based and other works that relate to this. Thank you very much for watching.